Welcome back to Buying Sandlot. Today, we're joined by Jeremy Goldberg, president and co-founder of LeagueApps, and Kate Quattlebaum, VP of Safety at NCSI, as LeagueApps announces they've acquired the background screening and compliance app. In the episode, we discuss why LeagueApps made safety its next major investment, how they'll integrate NCSI into the company, the conversation around athlete safety evolving, and their plans to simplify background checks and compliance for youth sports operators. But before we get into the episode, we want to thank Event Connect for sponsoring the show. If you're an operator or tournament director, you know tournament weekends have become mini supply chains. Teams register, rosters change, schedules shift, hotels fill, and parents scramble. Too many events still run on spreadsheets and last-minute calls. That's where Event Connect comes in. They centralize the weekend workflow and handle things like registration, rostering, payments, lodging, and real-time reporting. Tourney organizers can run end-to-end on Event Connect or integrate the systems they already use with no rip and replace required. Whatever you choose, the data lands in one place, so operators aren't stitching together reports from multiple tools. But that's not all. Their House and Connect feature embeds hotel bookings directly into checkout, capturing rooms at a peak intent instead of sending families to a separate portal later. And results can be up to 30% more room night reservations and 24% savings on team hotel costs. Need more proof? Event Connect powers 5,000 events and connects 30,000 hotels across 800 destinations annually. Learn more about how Event Connect can help power your tournament at eventconnectsports.com. Now, let's get into the episode. Welcome back to Buying Sandlot. We are here with Jeremy Goldberg and Kate Quattlebaum. Thank you both for joining Buying Sandlot. Jeremy, I know you have an announcement to make, so I'll let you take the floor.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's good to be here with you all, and also with Kate, as we are excited to announce that NCSI will be joining the LeagueApps family of solutions. That LeagueApps has acquired NCSI, and we know we've had a longstanding belief and conviction about safety and making esports better, as well as making it easier for things to be safe by supporting operators. And so we're really excited to be able to team up together with Kate and her team.
Congratulations on the deal. What makes NCSI a valuable asset, and how do you plan on integrating it into LeagueApps?
Yeah, I think ultimately it's the value that they offer is the value that they deliver to the partners and customers that they serve. And I think what was compelling to us is they're providing critical background checks and security solutions, safety solutions to organizations in the esports space, and have really established kind of industry leadership in that regard. And the fact that they're trusted by the U.S. Olympic Paralympic Committee, the U.S. OPC, and work with over 90% of the sports national governing bodies, I think is a real signal of the kind of great work they do to manage those checks and provide those safety solutions. And a lot of why they're successful and why they've been so effective is very similar to what we believe in at LeagueApps, which is their commitment to service, their deep commitment to partnership in serving those that are making sports happen, and also a belief in innovation that we can do things better, that we can make things safer, and that we can continue to figure out how to simplify the workflows for operators everywhere. So we're really excited. We saw safety and compliance coming up over and over again as a conversation and topic. And so NCSI is going to give us some more opportunities to be even more impactful together.
Kate, maybe talk a little bit about how substantial the NCSI business is. I think a lot of our listeners know what it is, probably interacted with it, or many of them have, but maybe talk about all the tentacles and touch points it has, and maybe the opportunity ahead of it as compliance becomes a bigger topic and opportunity around youth sports.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you are a coach, a parent, volunteer, over the years, it's very possible that we've been the person behind the scenes running your background check. But NCSI as a company, just to take a step back, is decades old, was founded in 2005. And the mission in which NCSI was founded was to protect vulnerable populations, specifically kids participating in sport. And what's really special about NCSI is that's never wavered. Here we are, over 20 years later, our focus continues to be sport. We are the one CRA in the industry that is so deeply rooted in sport that we understand the complexities of national governing body all the way down to grassroots level. We've seen how this space has changed, how the topic of safety has changed over the past 2 decades. And there's so much more that still needs to be done. And ultimately is one of the things that in a very early conversation with Jeremy that stood out was just the sentiment that youth sports should be safer. It's a belief that we very much embody at NCSI. We're a group of incredibly passionate individuals that work towards that mission every day. And we're servicing over 50 national governing bodies and thousands of organizations in youth sports.
Jeremy, maybe talk from a platform standpoint about what level of integration happens there with bringing NCSI on. It's become kind of part of the user flow and a transaction process around coaches signing up, athletes signing up, things like that. Do they stay two separate things? And then I imagine NCSI is part of the workflows of other platforms. So, what does that look like going forward too?
Yeah, great question, Colin. I think the first thing I'd say is, the plan is for NCSI to operate as a separate division, maintain the kind of leadership and operations they've had. And so even from day one, there are people out there that need to get background checks and want to make sure that they're doing that with the best possible provider. And so they'll have an opportunity to work with NCSI as they've done. We do also think, though, that the workflow of how the operators manage those checks and compliance is really important because you've got to make it easier, right? So what are the ways that they're capturing the information of who needs to have those background checks to then start and kick off that process? What's the way they understand the status of those checks so that they're in making sure that people are cleared and they're satisfying those requirements and expectations? And so all that work that exists around that compliance are what we believe from a workflow perspective that NCSI gives us more capabilities for, in addition to some of the integrations and connectivity we have elsewhere. We also recognize that there are other platforms out there that want to be able to offer background checks, and we think they should offer NCSI. That what they do is kind of the kind of unique kind of expertise in sports makes them incredibly valuable. So we think that should be available to everybody, even as we think about how this helps LeagueApps offer the most comprehensive solution that we can. And so we want to continue to innovate on the workflow and the management side, but also certainly support how people have access to the best possible safety solutions.
Okay, what does that workflow look like today? I've experienced it from a parent volunteer end, but I haven't seen it from an operator end. What does that look like today? And then how much maybe better can that get, to Jeremy's point, especially integrated with LeagueApps and things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one major point of difference, you made a great point. You see it from the lens of the parent. Before you get to the lens of submitting a background screen as a parent, there's the organization administrator who has to navigate compliance. And what does that mean for them? What regulations do they need to follow? What state-by-state requirements do they need to follow? What quality of background screen should they be running? What sort of criteria should they allow their organization in terms of who's allowed to participate and who is not based on the results of their background screen? There's so many decisions that have to be made before you ever get to the point of parents submitting the background screen. And that's where we actually spend a lot of our time. We've helped curate those policies, setting those standards with national programs for decades. And it's something that our expertise and our education on, we can also bring downstream to grassroots programs where a lot of times that's actually a volunteer who's trying to navigate all those decisions on their own. So that's one aspect of it that is typically not seen when it comes to safety and compliance. It's a topic that everyone recognizes. You need exceptional care. We have to lean into this, but then they don't have the expertise and the knowledge to solve all of that on their own. So that is something that we've embodied, that we've trained our teams on, and that we've spent time building that trust in this space to be able to consult on those policies. Then you actually get into the background screen itself, which, again, our team on the front lines is just exceptionally passionate about what they do. They don't view a screen coming in as another file number. They view coaches, they view kids, they see who's on the other end of that. So they're incredibly detailed. We're very thorough, and everything that we offer in terms of screening in the space is comprehensive. We're very particular about the packages in which we put our name on in the space and making sure that those background checks are incredibly thorough.
Talk maybe a little bit more about the education piece, and this could go to either of you. There's a couple of, reason we covered them, but like somewhat high profile stories. There was, I think, City of New Orleans said they didn't background check something like half of their volunteers. There was a U-Trip baseball incident that happened where a kind of quasi volunteer wasn't background checked, and ironically, they were kind of larger organizations, not the kind of small, really small volunteer led organizations that didn't do the background check. So I think a lot of people may have been surprised to see that, hey, like things are missed even amongst these larger groups, city run groups, for example. How do you kind of get the education out, not just to the smaller endpoints, but to the bigger organizations, and like proactively reinforce that this stuff needs to be done?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start and give Jeremy an opportunity as well. I think very simplistically, I mean, it looks different for organizations of all different sizes. But the thing I've consistently seen over the year is that you cannot make exceptions. You can't, when you don't allow exceptions in safety, you create a standard that you're telling your participants, your athletes, your parents, that it doesn't matter if this person has coached in our organization for years and we know them, right? Everyone's held to the same requirements. You're not allowed to be on the roster, to be on the field until you've completed everything that's required from a safety and compliance perspective. And as administrators of these programs, it has to be taken very seriously that there are mechanisms in place to check and vet that everything has been completed before someone goes onto a roster. That step alone, and not allowing for exceptions and validating that everyone in your organization follows the exact same protocol, is a huge step in the right direction. There's also the proactive side of this conversation as well, right? Like when you say safety and compliance, background screening is step one. We're the critical step one, and that checks your history. There's the ongoing side of safety and compliance as well, of how you have policies, training, open dialogue within your organization about how to handle situations that arise. All of that as well, that needs to be kind of coupled in with the importance of background screens.
And maybe just to ladder in, Kate says it well. If you hire a coach that you're coaching in baseball, and maybe they're not as great as you thought about teaching kind of hitting stances or defensive positioning, maybe you lose a game, maybe you lost some runs. You hire the wrong person and you haven't done the right thing. Then first of all, from a moral perspective, you now created vulnerability and potentially had an impact on someone's life that will last with them for a lifetime and create an impact in their community. But beyond that as well, you've got the liability implications that if you don't do the right thing, that those could be ending factors for your organization based on the liability that you may face, especially with a lot of the things that have happened in the youth sports insurance market. So this is an opportunity to do the right thing, but also it allows those organizations to mitigate the risk that would question the very viability of what it is that they want to do. And so I think to Kate's point, this can't be a place of exceptions. This can't be like you're trying your best. This is a place where it makes sense to be buttoned up and make sure that happens. And to us, it's combining the right kind of safety solution, the right kind of background check with the right kind of technology and workflow that double checks and ensures that you've acted upon the policy that you wanted to act upon. And I think what I've realized even as a parent is we take a lot for granted in youth sports. We assume that things are safer than maybe they really are, right? Because there isn't these kind of standards and expectations that are being set by anyone in a lot of cases. And so I think the overwhelming majority of youth sports operators have really good intentions here. But fundamentally, I think that the expectation of safety has to really be matched by the reality of safety. And that comes through the right kind of offering.
I've seen it firsthand. I've volunteer coached for several years now, but I've seen lots of cases where like, hey, we need an extra parent to come in and help because we're shorthanded this day. And that parent hasn't gone through the process. And then next thing you know, they just happen to be there every day and they kind of just are, grandfathered in as an assistant coach, but they haven't gone through the process. So that speaks to the, ongoing education that like, hey, you can't let these things slip through the cracks.
Can you go more in depth about how you mentioned making background checks easier, Jeremy? If you mind going in more in depth about how you guys plan to make background checks easier. We've talked to people in the past, a lot of them are using AI agentic workflows to make administrative work a little more easier. How do you plan on, kind of layering that in if you do, and then, also with better workflows, processes, and all that stuff?
Yeah, when I say easier, I think if you think about this, like anybody who's running a youth sports organization, there's a lot of workflows that you have to manage, right? And so fundamentally, if you're the first thing is there the upfront education, which is, do you actually understand what it is that you need to do, and do you understand who can help you do what it is that you need to do? And because that decision point, if you don't understand that, creates a whole bunch of issues down the road. And so I think that's the first step when we talk about making things easier, is giving them the information up front. It's the education, as Kyle was alluding to. Then I think it's understanding that what is the way that then you're putting information at their fingertips and making it easier. So those volunteers, or so those coaches, those administrators that are working within an organization, what's the easiest way that you can put them in position to initiate that background check process, but more importantly, follow up and ensure that those administrators, those organizational executives that are responsible for safety are understanding where there may be concerns, who's followed through those commitments, where are there gaps that they need to address as well. And so fundamentally, we want to, as we deliver workflows, we can put that information, whether it's through data, reporting, AI, there's lots of ways to make it happen. That all is predicated, though, then on the background check process itself. And that's the part we want to make sure there are no shortcuts. And Kate can allude to that, right? Because fundamentally, they have their own workflow at NCSI that needs to make sure that the highest levels of standards are maintained. So the information and processes are being followed. And then you combine that with the workflow kind of automation and support that we can provide on the LeagueApps side. And that's what excites us. And that's really where, when we talk about making it easier, it's on that end that we really want to put a lot of focus.
I would just add to that too. I mean, there's, Jeremy brings up a great point. It's all of the things that lead to the actual act of submitting the background screen. We at NCSI, we've also spent a lot of time in the past year building and innovating on what does that even look like when you are submitting the background screen. We've invested a lot in our technology. It's something that we're really excited to continue in this new home with the perspective of LeagueApps. But even when you get to the actual point of submitting the background screen, is your identity verified properly up front? Is your experience easy? When you're a coach and a parent who's on the go, how can we make that process simple as well? So that's been a big focus of us as well. I've lived it. You mentioned living it, like parent on the go, and you sign up to volunteer, and now you have to stop and take care of these, what could feel like administrative type requirements for your organization, but they matter so much. And so we also see a level of responsibility just within NCSI of how we make that easy, fast, secure, and really taking care of that experience on the front end. And then, like Jeremy said, it's the back end of how our teams operate, the trust that organizations have put in us over the years, of the care we put into each screen that we run. And that will always stay the same. But on the front end, how to make that experience easier.
How tricky, I think you mentioned the state by state regulation earlier. How tricky is that to navigate? How much do things differ between states? And, for either of you here, I know there's a lot of policy conversations going on, but would a federal level policy be helpful for operators to not have to navigate 50 different sets of rules?
One thing I think about, if we just step back, and I think, Kyle, I think you've covered this, but fundamentally, unlike any other sports system in the world, right? Any other country, there are ministries of sports or federation that are setting some structure of governance of how it happens. In the U.S. system, where we really don't have that, not to mention the fact that we have this participation that is often split scholastically and non-scholastically, which is often not a feature that you see in any other sports system around the world. So you have this really fragmented system that exists today. And one of the biggest gaps that exist is the minimum level standards around safety, right? And governance that exist around these kinds of issues. And so what you see is that, one, there's a patchwork of different state laws that may have their own expectations. That's one gap. And so, for example, I think in New Jersey, some state representatives have recently introduced legislation to require background checks for youth sports providers, which is great. But what happens when you go to a tournament in Pennsylvania and you're playing against the Pennsylvania teams and you're in an environment where they have different rules and expectations? So you have this patchwork that exists at the state level that it's its own set of challenges. The other thing that exists is that you have standards that are existing within the US OPC kind of world for competitions or for coaches that are officially members of that organization. But there are a lot of youth sports programs that are taking place that are outside of what happens within the USOPC, not to mention what's happening over in schools for middle school and high school sports. And all of that is dealing with an entirely different set of rules, whether it's on background checks and standards, as well as, for example, things like safe sport, where it applies in the USOPC environment, but doesn't apply elsewhere. So we've got a patchwork that creates a lot of complexity for the operators that are trying to do the right thing. And also creates a lot of gaps and inconsistent standards, and also unnecessary costs, where the same coach might have to get background checked 3 times because they're participating in 3 different kinds of venues and participation environments. So there's a lot we could do to be better here. And whether that's at the federal level, whether that's at the state level, whether it's the USOPC, I think there's a lot of room for conversation about what makes sense to set some minimum level of standards and to certainly make this a lot easier for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said earlier, Jeremy, that, there's a belief that people want to do this with good intentions, right? And I believe that too, that people who are in charge of running these programs for our kids, that they have the best intentions at heart. But to navigate multiple different state requirements, if you are, a regional league or a national governing body, not everybody has the luxury of, a GC on staff, a team of legal advisors who can constantly be monitoring all of the just constant evolution that we're all living through in this industry. And it is a lot to stay on top of. So I always love to see when there's more discussion of background screens being required, some set of minimum standard, but ultimately would love to have that be more consistent across our industry, making it easier for people who do run programs that cross multiple state lines to manage everything, to have it be easy. And ultimately, as I said earlier, when you think grassroots level, right, and someone who maybe they don't have to manage the complexity of state by state because they're a local program, there's still an understanding of, well, what type of background screen should I run? And we talk about this a lot at NCSI of, sort of debunking the myth that all background screens are created equal. And they're not. But to navigate that purchasing decision as a volunteer, it puts a lot of pressure on their shoulders of what should I choose and what is good enough? What is a trusted person to work with? So being able to provide some guidance at a grassroots level so there's a standard that they can feel comfortable working towards would be a huge step in the right direction.
We've written a lot about, I guess, and talked a little bit about on here how a little bit of consolidation, one of the side positives of it is that you have a little bit more structure, maybe a general counsel, maybe somebody who's thinking about this, certainly liability. There's the incentive there to take care of things. We had a guest on a couple of weeks ago who's running the youth effort for the Savannah Bananas. Kyle, I forget her first name, Nina. And she was previously with Little League, and she talked about the challenges of getting the local volunteers to kind of follow the same playbook. Do you guys see there being, the larger organizations, whether that's for-profit or nonprofit, having an advantage there in terms of their structure and being able to deploy this stuff? And then I guess as a separate part of that question is, you mentioned three, maybe parents going through 3 different background checks. We've heard that a lot. How much of this is like portable and interoperable to another tournament or even another platform? If this tournament doesn't use LeagueApps, like how easy is it to access the NCSI background check?
Yeah, just maybe to take a first stab at this, I think this question of, what's the implication of consolidation? Is that, and I think maybe one of the ways to think about it is there are some organizations that have recognized the need for this and also the risks if you don't do it well, and there's some that have not. And so I think maybe the better lens is not so much on size, but this idea that we are in this evolution of youth sports and this professionalization of youth sports. And whether that means you're a large organization investment backed, whether that means you're a volunteer organization and small, youth sports is too important not to have professionals involved. And by professionals, it means that professionalism that says we're going to make sure we do the right thing, whether it's on safety or it's a compliance or the way that we're kind of delivering the experience for the families in the right way. That requires a level of professionalism, because you don't get to the great outcomes that youth sports has to offer if that professionalism isn't there. That can exist in a lot of different formats. And so my view is that anybody that's coming in the sector or any of the consolidation that happens, I want to make sure all of that happens in a way that leaves youth sports better. And that, I think there's room for lots of different types of youth sports professionals. But there's a minimum level of expectation of what that has to involve, especially when it comes to something like safety. And so I do think that as the industry professionalizes, as there's more resources, as there's more education, there's more focus, that should raise the bar and expectation for everybody to be able to operate in a way that makes youth sports both safer, but also more amazing. And fundamentally, I think Kate can talk about the NCSI once you have that background check and the ability to transfer that. But we're excited to figure out how to work with anyone who wants to figure out how to make that outcome more attainable within youth sports. And I think we maintain that through different platforms and settings that we've had, and we'll continue to do that from a LeagueApps perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just again, it's the commitment to staying true to who we've been for 20 years, which is serving the vulnerable populations and particularly those in sport. And to live that mission, it doesn't matter how they get to us, but more NCSI background screens being done and education that we can provide on that to be able to simplify something that's so complex. And you touch on something that's actually a bit of a project for our team, and that we've had a lot of dialogue on over the years. And this whole concept of being able to share information back and forth. It sounds so simple. There are some things that you have to establish on the front end to be able to get to that vision, which is, first of all, the standards, right? If you're going to share a credential or a screen, well, first you have to make sure that is everybody following the same standard. You can't share, let's just say a high tier to a lower tier quality screen. You have to establish that there's a set bar in terms of what are we checking on the screen, and is that consistent from organization A to organization B, right? So getting people more aligned on a consistent quality of a background screen, the frequency in which they run that background screen, those are really important things that we're working towards up front to be able to open the door to, again, simplifying this from a parent perspective, not having to replicate that process 3 times over in the same season. So definitely a project and an area of passion for our team.
This one for me, Jeremy, bring it back to the business side of things. This is an acquisition, right? You guys are a PE-backed platform. You talked about making things easier as just part of the flow for operators. What other areas can LeagueApps as a platform go beyond just adding compliance and background? You guys do, lots of the registration management software. Any other areas you look towards that, like, hey, this is an expansion opportunity for us?
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd say is, the investors that we work with, not just the kind of some of the professional investment firms, but groups like Arctos that works with 30 professional teams and have a vested interest in where sport goes. Not to mention people like Julie Foudy and Shane Battier, Dahani Jones, and Swin Cash and others. I think we all are aligned that we want to figure out how to make youth sports better through the work that we're doing. So I think one lens by which to view the opportunities is where can youth sports be better, and how can we work with operators to facilitate that? So we've seen that in the opportunity that we're focused on through the compliance, again, through this acquisition, through partnerships that we've done and continue to do. But then there's also things like facility management when we announced the Rec Times acquisition, or in the way that we think about competition management and the focus on the work with Mod 11 that we've also completed. And so I think we're going to continue to figure out, like, my sense is that there's different strategies one has to grow a business. You could think about revenue aggregation as a strategy, or you could think about, can you transform the value you can offer to the people that are in the market? That's what we're really focused on. And from a transformation perspective, how can we help transform these organizations that are, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit, effectively running a business? And how can we help them run a better business that delivers a more amazing experience to families? And so there's no shortage of things that we see as an opportunity as part of our effort to offer the most comprehensive management platform possible.
Anything we missed that we should add? We always like to
add. Well, the one thing I'd say that we haven't talked about that has been part of the conversation is, I think when we recognize that as youth sports has evolved, is that there are a lot of kids that are left out. And, we've been really, I think, excited about the work we've done through Fun Play Foundation to make youth sports more accessible by specifically supporting the best youth sports-based development nonprofits and these SBYDs to support them with free access to LeagueApps technology perpetually, but also helped unlock about $50 million of government dollars to flow from the federal and state coffers into great youth sports organizations. And we've been also proud to be able to do that alongside other competitors, people like Team Snap that have been amazing to work with, or groups like Players Health that have been immensely supportive, and others in that work. And so as we continue to do that, one of the things that, as we talked with Kate and the team at NCSI, we wanted to figure out how to make sure safety and background checks were also accessible. And so we're going to be exciting that we're going to work together to help underwrite the cost of background checks for any Fun Play grantee and any of those youth sports development organizations, because they should have access to the same highest levels of safety and solutions that the national governing bodies have. And so we're excited to continue to scale that effort and to make sure that no matter who you are in youth sports, if you're running an organization, you're going to have access to the best technology, the best solutions to deliver the best outcome for kids.
Congratulations again on the deal. Good luck with everything, and we'll look forward to it down the line.